We recommend that you portion your salmon yourself. There are many pre-packaged, pre-portioned salmons out there in the grocery store, but they aren't always the same size, so they're not going to cook at the same rate at the same time. So buying a center cut piece is going to be your best bet. Things to look for when you are purchasing your salmon. First of all, if you have the fortunate luck to looking at a whole salmon, you want to make sure that you look it right into the eyeballs, well I guess the one eyeball that you can see while it's laying on the ice, and make sure that it is clear and not cloudy. You want to make sure that it is concave, not convex. Did I swap that around? Yes, okay, great, thank you. I've had a lot of blonde moments today, so please forgive me as I kind of stumble over my words a little bit. But yes, give the fish a smell. If you detect any notes of ammonia, you want to leave your shopping cart right where it is and run away as fast as possible. It should smell fresh like the sea. The skin should be firm to the touch. And as you can see, this bright pink or bright red color comes off of what salmon eat. Salmon are carnivores, so they eat krill, they eat shrimp. So same thing for flamingos. The same kind of application of shrimp is what gives salmon its bright red color. Something to look at when you are looking at a piece of salmon, it does tend to taper down on one side, and that is known as the fatty belly of the salmon. So don't ever worry about that thinner side of the salmon overcooking before the thicker side comes up to temperature, because the fatty belly of the salmon promotes all of that nice moist texture. So you don't have to worry about that portioning. It's really beneficial to you. When you do take this piece of salmon home, however, you want to, of course, examine it for pin bones. This is something that your fishmonger should do, but it's always a safe bet to try it yourself, again, just to give it a double, triple check, because that's the last thing you want to bite into after all of your hard work of cooking your salmon. So in the test kitchen, what we like to do is take any sort of bowl, lay it face side down, and then you just sort of drape the salmon over the side of the bowl. And what this does is it actually forces any potential pin bones, I can feel a couple right here, to stick out of the salmon. It makes it easier for you to get them out. I'm using fish tweezers. Ladies, we can use eyebrow tweezers, but just wash them after you use them. Just be careful of that. But when you are removing pin bones out of the salmon, you want to make sure that you're pulling the salmon out in the direction in which it's sticking, because it will wear and tear through the gentle flesh itself. So I'm very easily doing this with my tweezers. You're more likely to get bones on this side, the opposite end of the tail piece, closer to the head. The head is where a lot more bones are located. But as I said, the fishmonger should have done this for you, but it's always nice to double, triple check. Next in line, we have to talk about this little fatty membrane that we see here on the bottom of the salmon. It's very, very chewy, and no matter how long or hard we cook the salmon, this membrane is never going to break down, unfortunately. So we do want to get rid of that using a very, very sharp knife. The skin can be quite thick, so again, making sure you have a sharp knife is very, very important for you. As you can see, it kind of gives you a little bit of hassle as you cut through that with your knife. And what else do we have to do here? A couple other things. We're going to now portion. I'm going to portion just 2 pieces for our pan-seared salmon and 2 pieces for our poached salmon. So very, very simply, I'm going to cut this in half, and then I'm going to cut each half in half again to make 4 equal pieces, which is very great. So I'm going to take 2 pieces here. We're going to reserve these for later on for our poached salmon. We're going to take the skin off of those a little bit later on. But the ones that I have here are going to be for our pan-roasted salmon. It's very, very important to make sure that you have the skin on for this dish. And there's a couple of reasons that we'll explain a little bit later on. But there are other sort of details that we want to do to the salmon before we get that in our oven. By the way, my oven is at 500 degrees Fahrenheit right now, or 260 degrees Celsius for my friends out there who are fluent in Celsius. I have my sheet pan sitting in there. Wow, that was almost dangerous. I tried to say sheet pan sitting in there. Cool. In the oven, so it's coming up to temperature at that 500 degree mark. Sorry, Mom and Dad. All right, so the first thing we want to do, this is a combination, a hybrid method of both pan-searing and poaching. When you're pan-searing any sort of protein, you really want to make sure that you dry the protein as best as possible, because there is excess moisture on the outside. And if that comes in contact with the heat, it's just going to steam. We don't want to steam. We want to get a nice, golden, crispy exterior on the outside. Now, speaking of the skin, we want to make hash marks in the skin because there is a layer of fat between the flesh and the skin here, and that fat needs somewhere to escape. So very carefully, again, taking a sharp knife, running right through the skin. You don't want to go too much into the flesh. Again, having a sharp knife is very beneficial here, but you just need a couple of marks here in order for this magic to happen. If you cut into the flesh, it's really not a big deal. Just be careful and try your best when you're doing that. So, what's next? We want to season our salmon, of course. And with that, I'm going to take a little bit of extra virgin olive oil with my handy dandy paintbrush. And I'm going to very liberally paint both sides. You want to make sure that you do paint the skin side as well, and you'll find out later on when I remove it from the sheet pan as we finish up. But it's very important to brush both sides and also season with some salt and pepper. I always like to keep a separate bowl of salt and pepper mix when I'm seasoning raw protein just to avoid any potential cross-contamination. And as you can see, I'm using gloves to keep my hands very safe. But if you don't have gloves, just make sure that you wash your hands really well after you are finished with that. So I'm going to take my gloves off. We're going to get this hot sheet pan out of the oven. As I said, it's been at 260 Celsius, 500 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is smoking hot. And if all goes well and I can try to impress everybody, it's going to make a nice sizzling sound as I lay our salmon skin side down onto our sheet pan. Yeah. That's a great, no, it's the great one. It's music to a chef's ears is the sound of a sizzle. Ain't that the truth? Alright, so we're going to get this back into the oven, but the first thing I want to do is drastically lower the temperature of the oven. I'm actually going to lower it to what would be 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 130 degrees Celsius. This is my first time using this oven, so please forgive me as I'm trying to outsmart it. We have a lot in common. Who here got here yesterday? Me too, that's great. Excellent. My first time on the Eurodam, but I'm thrilled to be here, absolutely. All right, so you don't have to wait for the oven to lower to 275. We just want to drastically drop the temperature of the oven. So let's talk a little bit about this hybrid method that I was discussing, the combination of both pan searing and poaching. When we were testing this recipe in the test kitchen, we tried it a variety of ways to get to this process, as we mentioned before, 30, 40, 80 times. We tried this recipe first at an all-high temperature, at 500 degrees Fahrenheit, for the entirety of the cooking process. And by the time the outside got really nice, crispy, golden brown, the inside was that cat food that we were talking about earlier today. It was way overcooked. So then we tried it at the lower temperature, low and slow, 275 for the entirety of the cooking process. And while we did have a really nice tender interior, it was not a high enough temperature for the fat to render. So it was really mushy. So here what we're doing is we're getting the best of both worlds. Starting super high, dropping it down, so we have a nice golden exterior and a nice tender buttery interior. Speaking of this being wild salmon, because this is wild salmon, we're looking for an internal temperature of 120 degrees. If this was farm-raised salmon, we'd want it at 125. And my friend Dan, in just a little while, he's going to teach us all about how we got to that conclusion. Just reminded myself to set a timer. It's always nice to have a timer on hand, just because, you know, we forget things. We're all human beings. But in the meantime, while that is baking away in our oven, let's get started on our little accoutrement, if you will, our spicy cucumber relish. This screams summer. I know that summer is coming to an end, unfortunately, but this is a very refreshing, very light, a little acidic, a little spicy to really balance the high fat content of the salmon. So being that it is a spicy cucumber relish, we want to start with a cucumber. Yes, very good. But I here have an American cucumber. We prefer American cucumbers in the test kitchen. Not because we're America's Test Kitchen, but because American cucumbers are much firmer in texture than that of the English. And so when we're liking to take a bite out of something, we like to have it a little bit more firm in texture. However, as you can see, one thing I wanted to do to my American cucumber is remove the skin, because the skin can be a little bit more thicker. It kind of is hard to bite into as opposed to the English cucumber that has a thinner skin. So we always like to remove the skin from an American cucumber. There's another thing in the cucumber that we want to remove as well. I hear people whispering, yes, the seeds, yes, the seeds. We want to remove the seeds of the cucumber. A cucumber, believe it or not, is 95% water. And the majority of that water is in the seeds. So it's a really good tip to do at home. Very easy to do as well. Simply taking a tablespoon, scraping out those seeds. If we left the seeds in, it's going to make a very watery, very bland product in the end. And we want to get as much flavor out of these cucumbers as we possibly can. So just like this with my spoon, scraping out the seeds. And now we're ready to mince. We're looking for about 1/4 of an inch thick of these little pieces of cucumber. So it's very easy to just cut these right into planks and then have those planks again. I'm sorry about this pop, pop, pop of the microphone. I'm going to take care of that before the next show. But anyway, what I want to do is just run my knife right through the cucumber, just like this. And you know, it's kind of funny, that whole phrase, cool as a cucumber, is very, very true, as it is funny to say. But the cucumber, actually, the inside of a cucumber can be up to 20 degrees cooler than the outside temperature. So it really is, they're not lying when they say that it is cool as a cucumber, if in fact it is quite cool. So once again, we're just going to cut this into planks, and cut our planks into planks. So we have a plank. And then we're just going to run our knife right through here. Boom, boom, boom. So then we can move on to our next thing. Hey, this one got away. We're just going to set this aside so we can think about what it did. And add this to our bowl. The joys of live television cooking. It's always fun. But here we go, moving forward. Now, this is the salmon show, but it's also what I like to call the shallot show, because we're going to be using this throughout the entirety of today's show. We love the shallot in the test kitchen. The best way I can describe a shallot is as if an onion and garlic made a baby. It's not as harsh as a raw onion. There's a little bit of garlicky undertones. You can often find them next to the garlic in the produce section of your grocery store, but they're great aromatic in vinaigrettes and in this case sauces, and also for our poached salmon a little bit later on. But we want to mince this nice and fine. You don't want to take a huge bite out of any sort of onion family member. So what I want to do is make sure that that root or butt end is still intact. It's going to hold all those layers together. And I'm going to very carefully take my knife and do about 3 or 4 horizontal slices, just like this, keeping my hand nice and flat, because it is very beneficial as a chef to have all 10 fingers, so please be very, very careful in keeping your fingers out of the way of the blade. Now, I'm going to run my knife down vertically as well. You can kind of follow the lines on the shallot itself, and then we'll just run. I'm just looking for about a tablespoon or so. And now you can see we have a really nice, fine mince. So in the bowl you go, Mr. Shallot, or Mrs. Shallot. Either way is fine with me. So we have the cool cucumber, we have the sharp shallot. Next in line, we're going to bring a little heat. And with that, I want to talk about the jalapeno. Your recipe calls for a serrano, which we do not carry on board Holland America ships, but a jalapeno is suited just fine. Just know that a serrano is going to be a little bit spicier than that of a jalapeno. But there's a couple of things I want to do to my adorable little jalapeno. It's actually not adorable. It looks like it came from the Chernobyl farms, because this is a very, very big jalapeno. Thank you. Yes. Anyway, but I want to remove, I'll get back on that salmon in just a second. The first thing I want to do is remove the stems and the membrane and the seeds. Now, this is a great thing to do if you're ever worried about the heat level of certain peppers, because we did testing on this, and we found that the seeds carry up to 15 times as much heat as the flesh of a pepper. But that white membrane, or the pith of the pepper, carries up to 100 times as much heat as the actual outside of the jalapeno itself. So, if you want to remove these, please do. You're going to greatly alleviate the level of heat. I actually grew up in a family full of lunatics, so I like to keep the membrane and the seeds on the side for them to add more heat if they wish. But in this case, I'm just going to use about 3/4 of this pepper. And as I said, the same way that you don't want to bite into a huge piece of shallot is the same reason that you don't want to bite into a huge piece of jalapeno, because that can kind of ruin the rest of your day. So we're going to brunoise this, cut this into really tiny little planks.